The period of Imamah of Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi, starting from roughly around 114 of the Hijri calendar, going to roughly around 140-ish of the Hijri calendar. These very important years, during whose time the Umayyad dynasty collapses and a new dynasty comes to power, the Abbasid dynasty. The first major ruler of the Abbasid dynasty, Abu Jafar al-Mansur, as he called himself, la'natullahi alayh. This is all happening during the time of the Imamah of Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayh. It is important to know that the Imams were not reactionaries. The Imams did not decide to lead the Ummah in a particular direction based on the conditions and as a reaction to the conditions that developed. They led the Ummah in a certain direction, knowing based on the conditions what the outcomes are going to be in the short run and in the long run. In fact, the downfall of the Umayyad dynasty should be correctly understood to be the result of the work of the Imams, including Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayh. The Abbasid dynasty did not fall simply by itself because of the wrong conduct. Sure, that happens. There was wrong that the Umayyads were definitely involved in. However, there were many other rulers that lived before and after, and they didn't fall. Their rule, their government did not fall. They didn't crumble. It was the work of the Ahlul Bayt salamullah alayhim ajma'een that led to events that caused the downfall of the Umayyads. Now, I don't personally believe that that was the goal they had in mind, and that they were particularly dealing with trying to overthrow the Umayyad dynasty. That is not my reading, although that is the reading of some of our prominent ulama, historians. That was an actual goal, that was something that was an objective, they planned for it. My reading of that period and that era is slightly different. I see that the events were the result of the work of the Ahlul Bayt. However, that was not the direct objective of the Imams. It was not the objective of Imam Zayn al-Abidin salamullahi alayh, or the objective of Imam al-Baqir, or the objective of Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayh to overthrow the Umayyad dynasty specifically. If it had been their goal and objective to overthrow that government, then it must have been their goal to establish right after that the government of the Ahlul Bayt salamullah alayhim ajma'een. Not for another dynasty to come to power like the Abbasids. When you read the chain of events that took place in this period around the time of the downfall of the Umayyads, the weak point of the Umayyads, the rise of Abu Muslim al-Khurasani in Khurasan in the east, in the name of the Ahlul Bayt, which signals, by the way, the important point that we were mentioning, that it was because of the activities of the Ahlul Bayt that that dynasty and that government fell. The rise was in the name of the Ahlul Bayt salamullah alayhim ajma'in. But if it were their goal to overthrow that dynasty, then you should have seen the rise of the government of the Ahlul Bayt right after. When you see that didn't happen, and not only did it not happen, when you look at the conversations that Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi had with some of the other members, the broader family of the Holy Prophet, the Hassani Sadat, who at this point, the children of Hassan al-Muthanna, who were in search of and looking for power, and they justified it through some of the things they had heard from their fathers, from Imam al-Mujtaba salamullah alayhi, what the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet knew, which is that the Ahlul Bayt are the rightful successors to the Prophet. However, they specifically were not the ones that were supposed to take this position, yet they saw that people are looking for the Ahlul Bayt. They saw an opportunity, their nafs came in, and unfortunately you have claims of Mahdawiyya, you have claims from the Hassani faction of the household of the Prophet who claim to be the Mahdi, one of the lineage of Imam Hassan al-Mujtaba salamullah alayh. The lineage of Hassan al-Muthanna is claiming to be his father, and himself claimed regarding the son for him to be the Mahdi, and they called people to line up behind him. Everybody had heard about the concept of the Mahdi from the Prophet, the ahadith were there, and now this whole rise for the Ahlul Bayt, they took advantage of that. When you look at the conversations that took place in that context, some of them came to Imam as-Sadiq and they asked him, some asked him to join, approve, because the one who was well known, the most known person from the Alawi household of the Prophet, the Fatimi household of the Prophet, was clearly Imam Jafar as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi. He was the most well-known figure. They realized that if they want to do this, they want to pull this off, they need his stamp of approval. They came in, they asked if he would join. The Imam spoke to them and advised them not to do this. He told them, this is not what you think it is. You're not going to be able to accomplish what you think you're going to accomplish. And don't think this is an opportunity for you to rule, and it's not your position, it's not your place. Imam as-Sadiq advised them. Some of the others came, they wanted to force the Imam. They imprisoned the Imam, the Sadat, the household of the Prophet, the Hassani clan of the Sadat in the household of the Prophet. They forced the Imam, they imprisoned the Imam for a while. They tried to force him to approve of that movement, join the movement. They killed other members of the household of the Prophet in order to gain that. During this period, I'm giving you a little bit of what was happening at that time. When you hear what Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi says during that period, makes it clear that Imam as-Sadiq did not consider the direction to be the establishment of the government of the Ahlul Bayt. That's clear when you look at those conversations. When you see that, then you conclude that it wasn't the plan of the Ahlul Bayt to overthrow specifically the dynasty of the Umayyads, because if you overthrow that dynasty, you have a plan for afterwards, which is to establish your own dynasty. Otherwise, if the Umayyads are gone, the Abbasids come, the oppression was there, the oppression continues. The oppression of the household of the Prophet is before and after. The deviation from the path of the Prophet is before and after. The only thing that changed is the name, the title. What's the purpose? What's the objective? What's the benefit? Well, that wasn't what Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi was looking for. Up to this point, I want to get to a conclusion in terms of understanding this condition, the political conditions that the Imam was in, and how what happened was the result of what the Imams did, including Imam Jafar as-Sadiq salamullahi alayh. And what the Imam did as a result of the public effects of their work in terms of the Umayyad dynasty falling, and then not as a result of their work, specifically the Abbasids coming to power, but as the result of their work, people looking for a government that is led by the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. That was something that the people wanted. Be it that the Abbasids and these other folks that we just mentioned took advantage of that and placed themselves, presented themselves as the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet, which was wrong, and the people did not know this is not what is meant by the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. You've heard what is generally said when you mention the word Ahlul Bayt. It's in the Quran, right? Al-Qurba is in the Quran, Ahlul Bayt is in the Quran. And then some people think that this Ahlul Bayt just means whoever is in the house of the Prophet, his wives, his relatives, his uncles, and so on and so forth. No, that's not what that means. The Ahlul Bayt that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has purified are particular members of the house of the Prophet. It is Fatima, Ali, Hassan, Hussein, and specific children of Hussein, the 9 Imams that are after Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi. Those specific individuals are what are meant by the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. When the Quran says, Al-mawaddata fil qurba, قُلْ لَا أَسْأَلُكُمْ عَلَيْهِ أَجْرًا إِلَّا الْمَوَدَّةَ فِي الْقُرْبَى. Al-qurba literally means those who are near. They thought, some people think, this nearness simply means the nearness that a person has with their relatives. Your relatives are near to you. I say, okay, well that's what the word in Arabic means. Your qurba, who's close to you. All right, they would look at your relatives, your blood relatives, your uncles, your aunts, your cousins. Those are your relatives. But when you look at the Quranic teachings in general, you clearly come to understand that the qurbah that the Quran talks about, the closeness, the nearness that the Quran mentions to be true nearness, is not nearness that's based on genes, that's based on bloodline. It's based on ideology, it's based on faith, it's based on iman. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّا خَلَقْنَاكُم مِّن ذَكَرٍ وَأُنثَى وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا إِنَّ أَكْرَمَكُمْ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ أَتْقَاكُمْ. That we made you from a man and a woman. All of you are created through a man and a woman. A female is involved in your creation. For those who think the feminine gender is inferior, God says no. All of you come from a female and a male, both. Gender does not make you superior or inferior. Then it says, وَجَعَلْنَاكُمْ شُعُوبًا وَقَبَائِلَ لِتَعَارَفُوا. We made you into various nations so that you come to know one another. You are able to identify each other. What is the basis of having a position, having value in the eyes of Allah? Inna akramakum inda Allahi atqakum. The closest person to the Prophet is not necessarily the closest person in terms of lineage. The closest person to the Prophet himself could arguably be his parents. The parents of the Prophet, while sure they passed away before the Prophet ﷺ reached or came of age, his father passed away before he was even born, his mother passed away when he was very young, 4, if I remember correctly. But if they were of those who were close in this sense, then they would have been mentioned. It doesn't matter if they passed away earlier, but they're not. It's not about lineage. It's not about lineage. It's not about the bloodline. It's about Ali ibn Abi Talib salamullahi alayhi being from the light of the Prophet, not from the blood of the Prophet necessarily. Sure, he's the cousin of the Prophet, the son-in-law of the Prophet. The bloodline is there as well. But that's not what makes you qurba. And therefore, while the Abbasids were also cousins of the Prophet, if you want to compare it that way, Ali ibn Abi Talib is the cousin of the Prophet. Ubaidullah ibn Abbas, who is the Abdullah or Ubaidullah, one of those two, is the father of the Abbasid dynasty. That was a cousin of the Prophet as well. That's what they claim. The qurba that the Quran mentions is not the bloodline. It's not how close you are, if you're a first cousin or a second cousin, or no, it's not about that. If it was about that in the same context, with the Hassani Sadat, they are as considered the progeny of the Prophet, as close to the Prophet in that sense as the Husayni Sadat are. They are all the grandchildren of the Prophet. Yet they are not. They are not the qurba that the Quran speaks of. The qurba that the Quran speaks of are the closest in their ideology, in their thought, in their belief. That's their qurba. Ali ibn Abi Talib salamullahi alayhi is the same way the Prophet was. The Prophet is told by God in the Quran, you will not change the slightest bit any teaching in the Quran that God has given you. You're not going to change a bit of that. Not the slightest bit. And if you do, we will cut your jugular vein. The Quran tells the Prophet that. Not that the Prophet wanted to. God is making clear how serious this matter is. Ali ibn Abi Talib, when his son-in-law, Abdullah ibn Jafar, the husband of Bibi Zainab salamullahi alayha, he was not a very good man, as contrary to what some of us believe. At the time of Ali ibn Abi Talib, when Ali ibn Abi Talib was the governor, he took, in his mind, he borrowed from what belonged to the Muslimin, because his father-in-law is in charge of the affairs of the Muslims. He asked the person in charge of the treasury to lend him some of it so he can buy something for her. And he bought something for Zainab, the daughter of Amir al-Mu'mineen. When Ali came to know, he said, you will replace it right now, otherwise I will cut your hand off. That's theft. I don't care who the heck you are. You are my nephew and you are my son-in-law. It doesn't matter. I'm not going to change this religion, allow anyone to be involved with any type of corruption. Okay. That's what Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi was, and that's what Ali was. Abdullah ibn Jafar is Amir al-Mu'mineen's nephew. Lineage is there. Anyone else from the family of the Prophet would have said, okay, he just borrowed. No, you do not take advantage of your connections. If every Muslim had that opportunity, then you, as one of the Muslimin, have that right as well. But just because you're my son-in-law, you get privileges. We don't have these types of privileges in Islam. Okay. Ali doesn't kid when it comes to Islam and whatever God has said, even if it's his son-in-law. That's why he's the qurba, not because the lineage. At the time of Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi, they used lineage to say, yeah, the Umayyads were this, that, the other. You're looking for the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. It says Abu Muslim al-Khurasani went and negotiated with the various members of the broader household of the Prophet. He went to the Abbasids. He went to Imam as-Sadiq as well. Abu Muslim al-Khurasani is the general that was able to use the slogan of the Ahlul Bayt, Ar-Ridha min Ali Muhammad, as they mention, because they saw that, and they were told through the work of the Ahlul Bayt, because of the work of the students of the Ahlul Bayt. In that area, Abu Khalid al-Kabuli, the student of Imam Zain al-Abidin, he was able to rally up troops that were willing to put their lives on the line to fight the Umayyads based on what? Based on the idea that the Umayyads have oppressed the Ahlul Bayt, and the rightful rulers are the Ahlul Bayt, salamullah alayhim ajma'een. Now that he sees, oh my God, all these people have come in the name of the Ahlul Bayt, what do? I'm not one of the Ahlul Bayt. Well, everybody knows that. If you're rising in the name of the Ahlul Bayt, you better hand that over to the Ahlul Bayt. But he's trying to figure out, now this wasn't really faith-driven for him. It's not like he knew who the Ahlul Bayt were, and for God's sake, for the Ahlul Bayt's sake, he wants to go. No. He saw an opportunity. It was an opportunist. Now he's trying to figure out what he should do with this. Who am I going to put forth as the Ahlul Bayt? He negotiates. He negotiated with the Abbasids. He negotiated with Imam as-Sadiq. Imam as-Sadiq tells him, leave me. He negotiates with the Hassani Sadat. In the end, he's able to negotiate a deal with the Abbasids. And as usual, how this works, as soon as the Abbasids came to power, they saw him as a threat, they killed him. One of the first people on their list to get rid of when the infighting started. Because when you overthrow a government, that's the first part of it. When you want to establish a new government, what are you going to establish? And who's going to be the guy in charge? That's when the infighting starts, unless it's divinely guided, unless there are leaders that are divinely guided, unless the objectives of the leaders, in this case, Abu Muslim al-Khurasani is leading the people in their riots, in their military confrontation with the Umayyads. If he was divinely driven, there would be no such infighting. But because he isn't, it becomes about a power struggle. There's a power vacuum. You get rid of a standing political system, you overthrow it, now there's a vacuum. Now who's going to fill that spot? Infighting. The Abbasids fought amongst themselves. The Hassanis were fighting amongst themselves, fighting the other clans of the household of the Prophet. The Abbasids massacred the Hassani Sadat, massacred them. And anyone they thought may become another one of those who calls to themselves, they massacred them. During this period, and as we try to depict the political scene there, which eventually, as we said, the Abbasids were the ones who were negotiated in this deal, and they accepted, and they became the face of it, and eventually they started fighting each other, killing each other, uncle, nephew, brother, killing each other, until the main figure that came to power was Abu Ja'far al-Mansur. He was the most ruthless, the more genius in an evil sense, the wiser person when it came to the more intelligent, politically intelligent person, how to deal with people, how to deal with opposition for his purposes. And he was able to crush all opposition, get rid of any potential rival within the family of the Abbasids and within the broader family of the Prophet. Since the people are moving towards the household of the Prophet, he needs to get rid of all of those. And eventually Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi, because they knew he's the biggest figure and he does not accept them. And while the Imam did not actively try to topple that specific government, he encouraged people not to accept, not to approve, not to support, and to go ahead and overthrow any tyranny generally, but not specifically that one. Well, that's a big threat where Abu Ja'far al-Mansur had to deal with Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi. This is the broad scene that you see in this case. We talked a little bit about, in describing this, how that call to the Ahlul Bayt was because of the work of the Ahlul Bayt. Otherwise, it would not be the outcome of all the nonsense of the Umayyads for close to a century have been spreading on a weekly basis throughout the Muslim empire against the Ahlul Bayt, bad-mouthing the Ahlul Bayt, bad-mouthing Amirul Mu'mineen. The outcome of that would not be people wanting the Ahlul Bayt. The outcome of that would be hating the Ahlul Bayt. Because of the work of the Ahlul Bayt, people wanted the Ahlul Bayt. And we talked about some of the other players at that time, and we talked a little bit about the Goal of the Imam not really being in the political scene, not really being overthrowing that specific government. Recite a salawat, please. The Imam, however, did have goals, including political goals. Now, it's important that I spend a little bit of time on this topic, as there are many misunderstandings. When you mention the word political, there are many misunderstandings. One misunderstanding on one extreme is, why are we even talking about that? We're talking about Islam here. That comes from a mentality that thinks Islam does not include politics. Well, that's not correct. The Prophet was a leader, an all-encompassing leader, a comprehensive leader, a leader for the deen and the dunya. The Quran says, there are people that said, Rabbana atina fid dunya. Not that they asked Allah, but their ambitions, their desires, their wants, their goals in life were limited to the dunya. God doesn't say they're bad people, but then the good people are the ones who are aiming for the akhirah. When God wants to, in that context, say the good people are not such, He demonstrates to us who the good people are. Who are the good people? The ones that say, Rabbana atina fid dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana wa qina adhab an-nar. Okay? They combine deen and dunya. The welfare of humanity in the dunya is the objective of religion. It's not just the welfare of human beings individually in the hereafter that is the concern of religion. The concern of the Prophet wasn't only what you're going to be rewarded with in the hereafter. The concern of the Prophet was to correct the behavior of mankind on earth, for them to stop oppressing each other on earth, for them to develop the earth based on God's teachings with His guidelines. Come together, join hands, form a government to govern themselves based on what God has said. Okay, so that view is not correct. Islam does include the political side. However, the other extreme and the other wrong understanding is, while some of us have come to the understanding very clearly that the Quran, the sayings of the Prophet, the conduct of the Prophet, the conduct of Imam as-Sadiq, the rest of the Imams, clearly shows that that is a part of Islam, yet when it comes to the political scene, while they are believers, they seem to, in their minds, differentiate between religion and politics. The difference between this group and the first group is, the first group says politics is not part of Islam. This group says politics is part of Islam. But then the way you think of politics is the same way a non-religious person thinks of politics. It's just that they say, well, Islam says to deal with politics as well. Let me contrast that with the correct view, and then maybe we can see the difference here in what I'm trying to get to. Islam doesn't just say deal with politics. Islam doesn't just say politics are important. Islam also says this is how you do politics. Islam says this is how God says to be involved in the political system. For example, I want to say something that may be new to some of you and may be very controversial to some of you, and because of that matter, I will cite a very well-known scholar who is the most involved in politics in the current day, and that is Ayatollah Khamenei, may Allah protect him. He, and all of the Imam, he has said, these are his words, he says, democracy is a divine teaching. Okay? Democracy is a divine teaching. The reason why people are wanting democracy in this day and age is because of all the work of prophets, particularly our Prophet and our Imams. Otherwise, no monarch wants people to rule. No king wants people to have a say. The reason why people have come to a level where they want involvement in government, he says this, I'm citing, it's printed in a book called Insana 250 Sale, or the 250-year-old man. I don't know of a good translation of the book. If there is one published, then alhamdulillah. Otherwise, you'll have to find a different language. I know it's in Farsi, the original language. There's an Arabic translation. There's probably an Urdu translation. I'm not sure of that. There is an English translation that I'm aware of, but it's better if you don't read that. It's a horrible translation. They had to take out all the prints that they had distributed. That's how poor it was, unfortunately. Anyway, he says, the reason why people on a global scale are wanting things like democracy, equality, justice on a global scale is because of the work of the prophets, our prophet more than all the other prophets, and our imams. It's because of their work that this is there. Islam says, not because of the West, because the West doesn't really care about democracy. Let me make this very clear. This has nothing to do with the West, just to get that out of your head, all right? To clarify, let's contrast that. The West uses, just like the Abbasids used the claim, the call, the people wanted what? The people wanted the Ahlul Bayt. What did the Abbasids do? So we are the Ahlul Bayt. People in this day and age, they broke away from these dynasties, these royal families, these monarchs. We don't want that. We want a say in politics. And certain political figures, evil geniuses, were like, okay, we'll form a constitution. We'll allow people to vote, and so on and so forth. So we have a democracy. The beacon of democracy is this country. Do you really believe in democracy? Why is it when a people almost unanimously, 98%, never do we have in the history, in the recorded history of mankind, a revolution that followed its revolution within the first couple of months with a referendum that they made sure they are taking the votes of every single person that is willing to cast their vote, regardless of religion, regardless of ethnicity, whoever is within these borders and is a citizen of this country. You don't have in the record of any revolution, the recent revolutions, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, the Communist Revolution in Russia. None of these revolutions did you have a referendum about the type of government. None of these revolutions created a council through the vote of the people to write their constitution. None of these revolutions suggested that council put a constitution together. They printed that constitution in the newspapers, allowed everyone to discuss it for a couple of weeks, a few weeks, let everybody discuss this, let everybody read this, and then have another referendum on the Constitution again. You don't have that. The American Revolution was not like that. The French Revolution was not like that. The Russian Revolution wasn't like that. The people in all of these cases, in all of these revolutions, they were fed up with the governments that they were under. That's why they rebelled. It was a revolution. It wasn't a coup. It was a revolution. None of these revolutions have this track record. There's one revolution that has this. These Western democracies refuse to recognize it as a democracy. They call it a theocracy. They call it the government of the mullahs, as they call it. The government of the ayatollahs, as they pronounce it. Well, it's the government of the ayatollahs, but if the people voted for that, is that not a democracy? Do the people not have a choice? You are saying that the people's vote means nothing. If they do what we say, that's what we are going to call democracy. That goes against the very definition of the word. That's not a democracy. They don't believe in a democracy. They created the United Nations, this body, international body, supposedly after the second, what they call the World War, because according to them, they are the world. They fought amongst themselves. They call it a world war. Egypt didn't have anything to do with the World War. Pakistan had nothing to do with the World War. India had nothing to do with the World War. Iraq had nothing to do with the World War. Arabia, the Arabs had nothing to do with the World War. Especially the second one. The first one, the Uthmanis were involved in that. You call it a war. Anyway, after the World War, they created this body called the United Nations. All right. Look at how the structure is. There's something called the Security Council of the UN. You're in New York, you should know this better than I. The Security Council. There are certain permanent members of the Security Council. 5 nations have representatives. The United States, Russia, France, Britain, China. Okay. And these permanent members have the power, the veto power. If the whole world wants something, the whole world, all representatives, all unanimously agree, one of them says, no, it won't happen. What kind of democracy is that? If you believe in democracy. Islam believes in democracy. Actual democracy. The view of the people. The Prophet of Islam established government in Medina when the people supported him and said, we want you as our leader. He said, okay. After the demise of the Prophet, God said, Ali is the leader. Islam says, Ali, you're the leader. But the way our political system works is that in order for you to exercise your right to rule, people need to want it. If they don't want it, I don't want you to rule. They don't deserve you. Ali spoke to them. There's a letter. It's in the Rawda of Kafi. It's a very sad speech that Amir al-Mu'mineen gives. Very sad after the demise of the Prophet. And he talks to the people and tries to remind them of what the right thing, you're Muslim, you believe in Allah, you believe in the Quran. This is what the Prophet said. This is what you did. This is what Ghadir was. This is what the direction is moving towards. What happened? 360 people, according to the account, after the speech, in tears, came to Ali ibn Abi Talib and said, we'll support. He said, if I have the number of people that were in the battle of Badr, or the number of people with Talut, if I remember correctly, that figure, I will not allow them to change the direction of the Muslim Ummah. That was 313 people Amir al-Mu'mineen was asking for. Because that was a coup. What happened after the Prophet was not a revolution. It was a coup. A small minority, tiny number of people. But in order to deal with a coup, this is a democracy, a real democracy. People need to support their proper and true leader for him to deal with that coup. You don't want him, he's not going to rule over you. This is why we say Islam believes in democracy. Real democracy, not Western democracies, not the hypocritical democracy. Democracy is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. This definition, not liberalism, none of the other junk that they associate with democracy. Democracy is what the people choose. Okay. Doesn't make, by the way, whatever they choose to be right. But in order for the right thing to happen, people need to choose it. Ali spoke to the people, come and fight Muawiyah. Why did he speak to the people? Because they need to want it. He didn't say, none of your business, shut your mouths, get your swords out, get over there, otherwise I'll kill you. We're going to go and fight Muawiyah. He didn't lie to the people about why you need to go to Muawiyah. Muawiyah, on the other hand, lied to his people about why they need to go and fight Ali. Real democracy is not based on lies. Ali never lied. He spoke to his people about why we need to go and fight Muawiyah. They say, we will come. He went there. They almost won that fight. Malik al-Ashtar is at the tent of Muawiyah. Why does Ali tell Malik to come back? Couldn't Ali just say, just don't say anything to Malik. Let him finish the job. Okay, you guys don't want to fight. All right, don't fight. He could have stalled. You know what that means? That's what all these governments do. People want something like, okay, we'll try this, that, the other. Just pacify them. You guys do your thing. All right, we'll listen. What are your views? Just stall for a little while. Muawiyah's gone. All right, guys, he's already gone. We're done. Ali didn't do that. Ali didn't do that. Why did he not do that? Because this is Islam's system. No, you guys don't want to fight anymore? Okay, this is the right thing. You should fight. So we don't want to fight. Okay, you don't want to fight. Let's not fight. I explained to you why we need to fight. I explained to you that we shouldn't fight if he's willing to give in to the judgment of the Quran. I advised him to listen to the judgment of the Quran. He didn't listen. That's why we started the fight. They started the fight. And now we need to continue and finish this. I explained all that to you. Now you're coming around and saying, no, I'm talking to you and explaining to you that this is still the correct decision. You're insisting that you don't want to do this. There's not enough support for Ali except for Malik and a few people that are up there. Ali says, call Malik back. It's not our business. It's not about killing Muawiyah. Politics in Islam has a certain method. The political plan of Islam, the strategies, political strategies in Islam, the political tactics in Islam are from Islam, not from outside Islam. Don't talk about politics in the context of Islam, but then your methods, your goals, your strategies, your tactics come from outside of it. So Islam talks about politics. We must do politics. What do? This is what we do. No. That's a misunderstanding. Islam doesn't just say deal with politics as you wish. Islam says these are our goals, political goals. These are our strategies. These are our tactics. This is what you're allowed to do. This is what you're not allowed to do. War has rule. In Islam, it has rules. Not because of these guys, they make laws, they break laws. They made laws, they outlawed phosphorus as weapons. They supplied Israel with phosphorus weapons to use against civilians. They made laws, you can't use any weapon against civilians. They support Israel when they use all these illegal weapons against civilians, and they call it the rights of self-defense. They make laws, they break laws. It doesn't matter what law they make, it doesn't matter what law they break. Islam says when you're fighting an enemy, you're not allowed to poison the water or the air or any of that. No chemical, biological weapon. It doesn't matter how dire the need is to win that battle. You're not winning that battle with these tactics. Ali ibn Abi Talib, not only are you not allowed to poison it, you're not allowed to cut off water from your enemy. Ali in Siffin told his companions, his soldiers, his army, go take control of the water source. If Muawiyah takes control, he will cut off water from you. They initially listened, then Muawiyah played a trick. They lost control of that strategic location. Muawiyah cut off the water. Ali ibn Abi Talib said, what did I tell you? He told him, now it's your job. You go. Malik and some of the others, they went and reconquered that position, took control of that position. Now they wanted to do the same thing. Ali says, no, we do not cut off water. It's not an Islamic tactic. We don't care. Yeah, that can win us an early victory, but that's not a tactic we're allowed to use. Islam has rules. Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi, as the Imam of the Muslimin, had political objectives as God has made political objectives in Islam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. They are your awliya, they are your leaders, they are your political leaders. أَطِيعُوا اللَّهُ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولُ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. This doesn't mean simply go to them for salah and hajj. That is the other interpretation of these verses. The correct interpretation of these verses that as Shia we believe in is that your political and religious and spiritual and all the above leader is Ali ibn Abi Talib. Okay. Well, Islam says these are your leaders. You can't accept anyone else as your leader. Imam as-Sadiq is leading people towards this goal. The goal is what? To have a government that has a ruler that God is pleased with. God accepts his authority, approves his authority, gives him authority, and that ruler rules the people for their benefit, serves them for the sake of Allah, based on Allah's laws. Imam as-Sadiq sallallahu alayhi is leading the ummah of the Prophet in this direction. That's the goal. And therefore, they are leading people, advising people, informing people, building a strong grassroots foundation in the minds of the people to believe that the only rightful leader and ruler politically is the one assigned by God. When you do that to the masses are going to stop accepting the authorities they're living under as legitimate authorities. And when they have that mindset, they are ready. If somebody comes and takes advantage of this, like Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, they will use it to get people to rise against the government. So the Imams had established that foundation in the minds of the people, and they're moving in that goal, not to remove the Umayyads specifically for another tyrant to come to power like the Abbasids, but for tyranny to be rejected by people and for the just ruler to be supported by the people. This foundation to build towards that goal, to accomplish that goal, Imam as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi is using Islamic strategies, Islamic tactics. The tactic of Islam isn't, they presented this to the Imam. You know how many people came to the Imam and said, you have hundreds of thousands of swords that are supporting you in Khurasan. The way you and I would think, the way somebody who thinks, oh, the goal is what? We're trying to get rid of tyranny, we're trying to establish the just government. What do? You have over 100,000 people that are striking their swords in your name. There you go, everything's ready. Why don't you go and just get rid of the Umayyads? That's what some of the other members of the household, that's what Zayd al-Shaheed, may Allah bless his soul, that's what he did. When the Kufans told him, his son Yahya ibn Zayd, he also thought that they were not bad people, but they didn't know Islamic strategies. They didn't realize this. Imam as-Sadiq says, yes, I know that's available, but that's not the method of Islam. It's not a method to get an army. The Prophet didn't move to Medina and establish a government with an army. He moved toward Mecca and conquered Mecca with an army. That's a different scene. He didn't establish a government in Mecca. He defeated a foe in Mecca, an enemy that was fighting him, that deserved to be killed. He was merciful to them, allowed them to live after they surrendered. That's what happened in Mecca. Establishing a government requires the people to support it. He walked into Medina, the people of Medina flocked towards him. Whatever he did, they say, we're with you. He said, okay, conditions are there. We're established government. That's not the case at Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi's time. They're not specifically going for Imam as-Sadiq. They don't know who Imam as-Sadiq is. They've heard, okay, yeah, the Ahlul Bayt of the Prophet. That's what they've heard. That's what they've understood. And it's, 100,000 people, 200,000 people in Khurasan. Does that include all of the Muslim empire? People are not aware what they're doing. That's not the system of Islam. That's not the strategy of Islam. Ali ibn Abi Talib, when they came to his door, they begged him to rule. He didn't say, well, okay, I have a goal to establish this government. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. He didn't do that. What did he say? He said, it's better if you go find someone else. I'll help them. This was not a gesture. He was serious. He was serious. They insisted and insisted and insisted. Ali said, okay, I'm still not going to accept this until I talk to you. Whoever wants to hear, hears, doesn't want to hear, whatever you want to do. They didn't listen to what he said. He did his share. They decided to follow without thinking, like, no, we want this, we want this, we want this. Ali said, okay, I know you don't really want it, and you guys are going to turn against me, but again, democracy, you guys really want this? I'll do it. All right, I'll do it. He spoke to the people. He said, this is how I will rule. Are you sure? I'm not going to rule the way you think I'm going to rule. I'm not going to govern based on what you have seen during my predecessors' times, these so-called khulafa. I'm not going to rule the way they did. It's going to be the text of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. That's it. That is absolutely it. And he gave examples. He said, if anyone has any money from the Muslimin that has been distributed against what Islam says, I will take it from them. I will take it from them. It doesn't matter who they are. Are you guys sure? This was not a gesture. Imam as-Sadiq sees there's an opportunity there. Yeah, he could have used the army that Abu Muslim al-Khurasani, didn't he topple the Umayyad rule? He did. Imam as-Sadiq could have become that rule. Yeah, but that's not Islam's tactic. That's not Islam's strategy. That's not how you do things. You don't topple a government with a military. No. If people want it, they need to come out on the streets. That's what Imam Khomeini did. It was based on this Islamic teaching. The reason why, when some of the other great people, some ulama, were fighting the Shah because he was so oppressive, they fought him, they had arms. They used to assassinate some of the members of the Shah's government. They assassinated a number of them. Imam Khomeini said, I'm not telling you that what you're doing is haram, but I'm telling you that's not Islam's method. Islam's method is this: people need to rise. They need to choose. And when they came from the tiniest villages to the major cities, all chanting, we want Islam. We don't want the East, we don't want the West, we want Islam, and we want Khomeini. Ya Marg, Ya Khomeini, either death or Khomeini. And Khomeini as a symbol, Imam Khomeini always knew it's not about me as a person. These people are not chanting for me as a person. They've seen Islam here, that's what they want. They saw the turban in their minds, this represents Islam. It's not about this face or the other face, this name or the other name. The people want Islam. This is Islam's method. Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi, it's presented to him. He has a goal clearly to rule based on what God has said. But the method that's presented to him is not according to Islam. Imam as-Sadiq says, no, this is not our time. This is not our time. Why? Because it's not the right method. It's not the right method. We're never going to use the wrong method. The goal does not justify the mean. If the means are not what God has approved of, we don't want it. We don't want it. Some people promote, this is not in the Shia community, we don't really hear this, although there's little heard from the Muslim community, from the Shia community in regard to this, but just to clear the air in this regard. There are claims, I wouldn't even say non-Shias say this. There are claims that these militant Islamists, fundamentalists, whatever they call them, are trying to topple the U.S. government by terrorist activities. That's why they check all of us for bombs in the airports. Okay, I don't know how much you get stopped and how many times they run their hands all over you to see if you got any bombs on you. any chemicals or any of that. That's not Islam's method. It was never Islam's method. Not because anybody's afraid. Imam as-Sadiq was not afraid. A real believer is not afraid. It's because Islam says no. There will never be an Islamic government in a country that does not have a majority Muslim. And there will never be an Islamic government in a country that has majority Muslims, but they claim to be Muslims, but they're not willing to sacrifice for their Islamic government. There will never be, let alone to be forced to have an Islamic government. There will never be such a thing. If anybody brings to power a government that they call an Islamic government with the help of a military, well, that's never going to be an Islamic government. Never. That's not Islam's government. Islam's government is this. Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayh. I hope I can end this. This is a very complex topic. I was told to talk about the political accomplishment of Imam as-Sadiq. I can now start to talk a little bit about, so what did he? He didn't want the government at that point because that's not the method. But what did he accomplish during his time on the political front? I really apologize. It's already been an hour. I don't like talking this much, but with that topic, I couldn't explain it. It wouldn't make sense if I didn't explain all of this. What did the Imam establish? The Imam established a foundation in political Islam that needed to grow. He planted a seed. Okay. Political Islam, don't forget those terms. In political Islam, which is true Islam, from this aspect, he planted a seed. Perhaps one can argue that between the time of Imam al-Hussein salamullah alayh up to Imam as-Sadiq, before Imam as-Sadiq, before this last part of what Imam as-Sadiq is doing, perhaps one can argue that what was established in political Islam is the importance of political involvement, and that your political rules can't just be whoever. That was established. With Karbala, that was established. Imam al-Hussein's movement and the aftermath of it, what Imam Zayn al-Abidin did, what Zainab salamullahi alayha did, that established a foundation in the minds of any one of the Muslimin who wants to see this, and many did, not too many, but it wasn't one or two people, especially over the course of these few decades after. They realize that you can't just have anyone to rule, and we have a political agenda in Islam that is different than this style that's going on. With the advent of the Abbasid dynasty, in the context of which Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi is leading the Ummah, one important next foundation is set, and that is that this political movement is a spiritual movement. I don't mean it in a Sufi sense. I don't mean it in a way where it defeats the political purpose, because in the views of many, spiritual activity has nothing to do with politics. No. The marriage of the two. The politics without Islam, without spirituality, is the politics of the Umayyads, the politics of the Abbasids in the name of Islam. That's what happens. You can carry the title of Islam, the title of the household of the Prophet, whatever title you like to carry, and call those your goals, your objectives. As some of those Sadats did, they pulled up some of the things they heard from their fathers. Oh, we need to do this. You can call it whatever you want. If it does not have a true spiritual foundation, it will be a corrupt government, and therefore it will never be an Islamic government. It will never be an Islamic government. An Islamic government is a spiritual government. It's a government that the leader, the ultimate rightful leader, ruler of the government is the Prophet himself. The greatest ever spiritual person ever created in ways that we can never imagine. After him, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Mawla al-Muwahhideen, the next most spiritual person is the leader of government. Then each of the Imams, currently Imam al-Hujjah, when it comes to spirituality, people mention names of, I don't know, Sayyid Ali Qadi, Tawatawat, Labahj. None of them are in any way comparable to the 12th Imam, Ajjalallah Ta'ala Farjahu Sharif, in terms of spirituality. Our ultimate political leader is the most spiritual person on the face of the earth. And in his absence, the best we can find. Not in his absence, while we don't have access to him in this way. The best alternative available. The most spiritual person we can find. Not someone that they focus in the concept of wilayatul faqih, which is during the time of the major occultation, this is what we're told. According to numerous ahadith, all the fuqaha, I don't know what this hype or this confusion people have about it, like not everybody agrees with wilayatul faqih. Anyone who says that has no idea what they're talking about. They have no idea what they're talking about. Every single fiqh book, not the recent fiqh books, not post-Imam Khomeini, not Imam Khomeini, not even Muhaqqiq al-Niraqi, all the way from the beginning of the major occultation, which are the first books that we have any view of any scholar recorded in our history of Tashayyu, every single one of them has this there. There is not a single one that doesn't. The difference is whether it was possible to implement or not, which Sayyid Sabzawari, rahmatullah alayhi, in Najaf, one of the peers of Ayatollah Khoui, he mentions it in his book in this way. He says, Sayyid Abdul A'la Sabzawari, rahmatullah alayhi, great faqih, spiritual person. He says the difference of opinion among scholars is not whether or not there's something called wilayatul faqih. It's whether or not we have someone with these qualifications. If we have someone with these qualifications, there's no question we have a wali that everyone needs to follow. And that person and everyone else that saw Imam Khomeini and after him Ayatollah Khomeini knows that these are the people that have those qualifications. Spiritual foundation. We don't want political rule if it's not ibadah of Allah. We don't want to rule over a second person. The Holy Prophet advised Abu Dhar, this great companion of the Prophet that you've heard. The Prophet spoke to him once in private and said, Abu Dhar, I want to give you advice for your own good. Take it from me. He said, Ya Rasulullah, whatever you say. He said, don't accept to rule over a second person. You can't do it. It's not your thing. If you do it, you're going to screw up. You may rule. What does he mean by screwing up? It means you're going to do things against what God has said. Don't rule over even one person, let alone a city, a tribe, a city, a country. If that political role is not ibadah of Allah, you don't want it. Ali didn't want it. Ali could have. They asked questions. Answer these questions to yourself. Find the real answers. Why did Ali not take the sword? Could he not? Of course he could have. Ali spins his sword and uses it. One strike is afdal min ibadat al-thiqlain. He drops the biggest monster of the mushrikeen and the biggest monster of the Jews that no one else can deal with. Allah wanted that. Ali took out his Dhul-Fiqar. La fata illa Ali, la sayf illa Dhul-Fiqar. At that point, Ali worships Allah with that. After the demise of the Prophet, 360 people said, we pledge we will come with you. You asked for 313, we are 360. He said, okay, tomorrow morning, shave your heads and show up in this place. He mentioned a certain location in Medina. Next morning, only Abu Dhar, Zubayr, Salman, Miqdad. 5, 6 people, that's it. Nobody else showed up. Amir al-Mu'mineen said, God knows. If it wasn't for what the Prophet has told me, in other words, ibadah of Allah, if it wasn't for that, I would have stopped these fools. I would have. He could have. Ali doesn't want it. God doesn't want it. Not that he can't. He can. Very qualified. Militarily, very qualified. He doesn't want to win that war. Only when Allah wants. That is a foundation. So this idea, this belief is in the Imams. It needs to become part of the Muslim community. Imam as-Sadiq's political accomplishment was to plant the seed by training students that understood this, for this to grow, so that 1,000 years later it becomes a movement where those killed in this, according to his hadith, قَتْلَاهُمْ شُهَدَاءَ. They fight not for fame, they fight not for rule, not for authority, not for respect. Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi planted that seed. He trained people that combined these two, had those political objectives, as well as understanding that we're only going to take the spiritual path. We're not going to take any other's path. That had to grow and grow. If you see any accomplishment, if you see Hezbollah kicking these guys' tails and making these decisions so perfectly that these guys don't know how to deal with, they try to get the Lebanese people to face Hezbollah and become the opposition to Hezbollah and make people think that Hezbollah is against them. The people keep supporting more and more. You can lock as many of them as you want. Give any sanctions. They're sanctioning Lebanon as well. They have. They're trying to create a lot of problems there to get the people to turn away from. The reason why people are supportive of that group, that party, is that the people have identified, first of all, in their own minds, in their hearts, and in that leadership, the purpose, the reason, the methods that we use in the political sphere is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's guidance. There's a lot of political infight. Walid Jumbalat is one clown, the other Samir Ja'ja is another idiot. All these people that are political figures in that scene, all the umala, as they call them, the people that worked with Israel, all these people are there. Each of them is doing their thing. How do you deal with them? What Allah says. There was a civil war. During a civil war, you can pretty much get away from anything, with anything. They could have killed a lot of people, as the other side was doing that. No, we don't want to win this in whatever way. If you see that in Lebanon, if you see that in Syria, if you see that in Iraq with as-Sha'bi, as-Sha'bi was led by leaders and was formed by believers whose methods were Islamic methods. All this nonsense against Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq these days. Do you think they can't retaliate? Muqtada Sadis, may Allah remove him. He's causing so many issues in Iraq. So many issues in Iraq. You think Harsh al-Sha'bi can't get engaged in battle and get rid of the leadership there and many others? They can. They can. But that's not the Islamic method. That isn't. That's why they don't. If you see this is on the rise now, this is the work of Imam as-Sadiq salamullah alayhi. By training students that combined these two, they grew stronger, larger in number. By the time of the minor occultation, it was sufficient enough that the Imam goes into occultation, and for centuries he will rely on the ones that have been trained, the ulama, the pious ulama that have combined both of these. That's why from the books of Shaykh al-Mufid onwards you find this idea of wilayatul faqih, because they combined the politics and the spiritual aspect. I don't know, I went again another 15 minutes over that time that I mentioned earlier, but I don't believe I've been able to do justice to the topic. It requires another 30 or 40 minutes just to get across what this is, what this political foundation is, how important it is, how the Imam did it, what the results were, who those figures were that were the first individuals that were taught. Some of them, we don't know all of them, some of them. That takes another 30, 40, 50 minutes to just scratch the surface there. That we hope that the brothers and sisters here who are interested in the topic are able to follow up with, read, think, and trying to gather that information. It is very important, very vital for us, for anyone who is part of the movement of the Imam, who wants to be a Shia of Imam Jafar as-Sadiq salamullahi alayhi. They need to understand all of his accomplishments, all the sessions you've heard, the classes you've heard he had. One of the outcomes of them, it's not the only outcome, is establishing this. All of those activities were part of establishing this foundation. All of those activities were part of this, and of course other objectives that are related to it, that inshallah some other time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the return of our Imam. We ask Allah to help us be his true and close companions. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help all those who are helping his cause, especially our ulama, our maraja, above all our leader. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us all of our sins, forgive our parents, our grandparents, our relatives, all believers, those who are alive, those who passed away. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant all of us and all believers worldwide our hajat, our needs, our requests. We ask Allah to relieve all those who are suffering from hardships, difficulties, illnesses, and we ask Allah to relieve all the people of the world of the oppressions they're facing. Bin Nabi wa alih, rahimallah man qara al-fatihata ma'as salawat.
Sure, we're done. Okay.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله، السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين، السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى، السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي المجتبى، السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، يا حسين بن علي الشهيد بكربلاء، السلام عليك يا علي بن الحسين زين العابدين، السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الباكر، السلام عليك يا جعفر بن محمد الصادق، السلام عليك يا موسى بن جعفر الكاظم، السلام عليك يا غريب الغرباء، السلام عليك يا أبا الحسن يا علي بن موسى الرضا. السلام عليك يا محمد بن علي الجواد التكي. السلام عليك يا علي بن محمد الهادي النكي. السلام عليك يا حسن بن علي العسكري. السلام عليك يا حجة بن الحسن القائم المنتظر المهدي يا صاحب العصر والزمان. السلام عليك يا شريك القرآن. السلام عليك يا كامل الكفر والطغيان. السلام عليك يا دافع الظلم والعدوان. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك. السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم قل وليك الحجة بن الحسن صلواتك عليهم وعلى آبائهم في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة ولي وحافظ وقائدا وناصرا ودليل وأينا حتى تسكنه وزكاته وتمتعوا فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.